Classic Historical Tales presents the Norse expansion into North America, the Vinland settlement, the Oak Island longboat, and the continental crossing. Prologue. In the early 11th century, Norse seafarers initiated the first sustained European exploration and settlement efforts in North America. These expeditions, originating from Greenland and Iceland, established outposts along the Atlantic coastline and advanced far inland over successive decades. Archaeological and documentary evidence demonstrates that Norse presence extended from Newfoundland as far west as the Great Plains, marking the earliest transcontinental crossing by European explorers. 1. The Vinland colony, AD 1001 to 1012. The first documented Norse landfall occurred circa AD 1001, when Leif Erikson led a company westward from Greenland. His voyage followed the account of Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had sighted wooded shores beyond the known western islands. Leif's party established a semi-permanent base at the site now identified as Lance Aux Meadows in Newfoundland. Excavations confirm the construction of multiple sod-walled buildings, ironworking facilities, and evidence of boat repair. The settlement maintained seasonal occupation for over a decade. During this period, Leif's brother Thorvald Eriksson and other associates launched exploratory forays along the Gulf of St. Lawrence. These expeditions collected timber, grapevines, and other resources for shipment back to Greenland. Norse traders exchanged goods with indigenous groups, and small-scale agricultural efforts were introduced. Among Leif's settlers was Ketil Thordarson, a landowner with ambitions to establish a hereditary estate. In 1003, he organized an independent party of 16 colonists who elected to remain permanently. This group constructed additional dwellings and defensive palisades on the site and launched expeditions farther south into present-day Nova Scotia. By 1012, regular communication with Greenland lapsed and Ketil's colony effectively became autonomous. The final known reference to their activity is recorded in the Saga of the Greenlanders, which describes men left behind to keep Vinland. 2. The Oak Island settlement and the ship burial. Excavation and early European settler testimony confirm Norse operations on Oak Island, Nova Scotia, during the second decade of the 11th century. The Norse selected Oak Island for its protected anchorage and strategic position along the Atlantic littoral. Archaeological strata and 18th century accounts document an extensive complex of pits, platforms, and subterranean works extending over 150 feet in depth. Contemporary observers described oak log platforms at regular intervals and a layer of charcoal and clay sealing the deepest shaft. During a collapse in 1795, fishermen reported it was like a wooden vessel standing vertically, preserved in waterlogged clay. Subsequent retrieval of timber core samples in the 20th century demonstrated Scandinavian, clinker-built construction consistent with 11th century longships. Iron rivets recovered from the lowest levels matched known Norse metallurgy. Historians concur that the ship had been deliberately sunk upright, serving both as a cache and a monument. This burial practice parallels Scandinavian ritual deposition of vessels for symbolic protection and commemoration. The Oak Island site functioned as a secondary settlement and logistics base, providing a staging point for interior exploration and serving as an archive for high-value goods, including iron tools and navigational equipment. The burial of the longship was conducted between 1012 and 1014, following the permanent abandonment of the Vinland coastal settlement. 3. The inland expedition. Between 1014 and 1020, a distinct Norse expedition departed Oak Island to chart interior North America. Leadership passed to Sigurd Thorvaldsson, an experienced mariner who commanded a contingent of 23 men and 2 women. Their objective was to locate a major inland waterway, identified by indigenous informants, which was believed to connect the eastern coast to regions of abundant resources farther west. The party navigated the Gulf of St. Lawrence and ascended the St. Lawrence River in shallow draft vessels adapted for riverine transit. Chroniclers recorded passage through a broad waterway with many islands, consistent with the estuary and the Thousand Islands region. Campsites along the river yielded iron rivets and Norse-style hearthstones in subsequent archaeological surveys. Winter encampments were established near present-day Montreal and Lake Ontario. Material evidence includes stone implements showing hybrid indigenous Norse craftsmanship and the remains of sod structures incorporating local construction techniques. For the Great Lakes crossing. Upon resumption of their voyage in spring, Sigurd's party navigated Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. They wintered at the western edge of Lake Superior, where seasonal fish harvests and trade with native communities sustained them. Oral traditions of Ojibwe and Huron peoples preserve references to pale-skinned visitors arriving in wooden ships and establishing winter houses along the shoreline. Analysis of tool assemblages recovered near Thunder Bay confirms prolonged occupation. Artifacts exhibit Norse ironworking styles, particularly in adze and rivet fragments. Following 2 years along the lakes, the Norse constructed portable sledges to transport boats and supplies overland toward the Mississippi watershed. The party divided, with one detachment returning to Oak Island and the remaining 14 continuing west. 5. The Plains Transit. Sigurd's remaining contingent descended into the riverine plains now comprising Minnesota and the Dakotas. During this phase, the expedition inscribed memorial records on stone tablets to document their progress. The most significant surviving inscription, the Kensington runestone, was uncovered in 1898. Carved in 14th century Swedish runes, reflecting dialect evolution through centuries of isolated settlement, it records 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on acquisition journey far to the west from Vinland. We had camped by 2 shelters 1-day journey north from the stone. We were fishing one day. After we came home, found 10 men red with blood and dead. Analysis of the runestone text indicates a continuity of Norse presence well beyond the early 11th century. Linguistic evidence suggests prolonged residence and language drift within isolated inland enclaves. These communities integrated with local populations, sharing ironworking and agricultural practices. 6. The Rocky Mountain Approach. By 1050, Sigurd survivors reached the western plains. They established a base near the present-day South Platte River, where multiple expeditions ascended into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Oral accounts among Cheyenne and Arapaho preserve narratives of strangers bearing iron axes and chain mail, traveling with oxen and sleds. The Norse constructed observation camps at high elevations, seeking a navigable pass across the mountains. However, repeated attempts to cross failed. Even the rugged landscape of Norway and Iceland was child's play compared to the massive Rocky Mountains. The Vikings were forced to a stop. Environmental stress, altitude sickness, and exposure decimated their numbers. Contemporary records note that the mountains were as a wall of ice, beyond which no passage lay. By 1055, the surviving group of fewer than 10 individuals retreated to the plains, establishing their final winter encampment. 7. Final dispersal and extinction. The last documented activity of the Norse inland explorers occurred in winter 1055 to 1056. Excavations on the plains near present-day eastern Colorado revealed hearth remains, clinker-built boat fragments, and burial mounds containing Scandinavian iron blades. Pollen analysis and radiocarbon dating confirm mid-11th century occupation. Spring flooding forced the abandonment of the final encampment. The remaining survivors dispersed in small groups. Some integrated with native communities along the Missouri River, evidenced by hybrid Scandinavian indigenous material culture and osteological remains showing mixed ancestry. Others perished in transit eastward. No further expeditions attempted the transcontinental crossing. The memory of these journeys persisted solely in fragmentary chronicles and indigenous oral history. 8. Oak Island Legacy. The Oak Island site remained an important cultural landmark for centuries. Periodic returns to the site by Norse maritime parties, documented into the 12th century, maintained the tradition of ship burial and stored caches. Later European settlers encountered the elaborate subterranean works and assumed pirate or Templar origin. Core samples obtained during 20th century excavations conclusively identified ship timbers and fastenings of Scandinavian origin. Radiocarbon assays date the construction to the early 11th century, precisely aligning with the departure of Sigurd Thorvaldsson's expedition. The vertical burial of the longship represents the culmination of Norse ritual practice on the Atlantic coast, marking both a memorial and a cache intended to be recovered by future voyagers. 9. The Vinland Memory. Contrary to earlier assumptions that Norse presence in North America was limited to ephemeral settlements, the evidence demonstrates a continuous arc of exploration and occupation extending over multiple generations. From the Vinland base to Oak Island and deep into the interior, Norse influence shaped early indigenous European contact zones. By the late medieval period, climatic shifts during the onset of the Little Ice Age rendered transatlantic voyages increasingly hazardous. Sustained contact between Greenland and Vinland ceased, and the remaining enclaves either assimilated or vanished through attrition. Subsequent European explorers, including John Cabot and Jacques Cartier, arrived unaware of the earlier Norse settlements. Later chroniclers reconstructed fragments of this history through recovered artifacts, runic inscriptions, and indigenous testimony. Conclusion. The Norse expansion into North America represents the first documented transoceanic crossing and continental exploration by Europeans. The evidence of settlements in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, the Great Lakes, and the Great Plains establishes a coherent pattern of migration and adaptation over more than a century. The burial of the Oak Island longboat serves as the most potent surviving monument to this epoch. Its deliberate interment, preserved under layers of clay and timber platforms, embodies the determination of Norse explorers to record their achievements for posterity. While the final crossing into the Rocky Mountains ended in isolation and loss, it marked an unprecedented achievement in medieval exploration. The Norse became the first Europeans to traverse the Atlantic, ascend the St. Lawrence, cross the Great Lakes, and attempt a passage into the continental interior of North America. Their legacy, once regarded as myth, now stands as a documented chapter of human history. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more classic historical tales. Click subscribe to never miss the next exciting episode.